Welcome to the Engineering Room, a monthly series of long-form conversations with influential people from the software world. The Engineering Room series is sponsored by Equal Experts, and I'd like to thank them for their ongoing support. So if you'd like some help building some great software or are interested in finding a great place to work, please do check their links in the description below. My guest today is a developer, an independent consultant and technical coach. She works with developers to help them to learn and adopt effective agile practices like refactoring and test-driven development through training and coaching. So she's going to fit in really nicely with the continuous delivery channel, I think. Emily helped to popularise ideas like approval testing and did a lot of work to create implementations of the popular Gilded Rose coding and refactoring kata, and is a person that introduced me to the use of approval testing frameworks. She's also written 2 books, the Coding Dojo Handbook and Technical Agile Coaching with the Samman Method. She's an international keynote conference speaker and runs courses teaching all of these skills. Please welcome my guest, Emily Bache.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Dave.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for agreeing to come today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. How would you describe your philosophy, your thinking about software development, what it is and how we should undertake it?
Oh, wow. So that's a big question. So I've been a software developer. It's actually 25 years now since I graduated and started working in the industry. And I've always kept very close to the code because I kind of find that the most interesting part. So that as a philosophy of how we should build software, I'm very concerned with what we're doing with the design and the classes and the methods and the unit tests and all of that stuff right there in how developers are spending their time day by day, minute by minute. That's the part of software engineering that I'm really interested in.
It's interesting. In your description, you mention design at the start, and I think I would agree. I would agree very strongly with that. Is that seems like the really interesting part to me, the challenge, I suppose. And I think that's different. You think, I don't, would you agree that's something that changes with experience, your view of that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the design principles that I learned very early on of object-oriented design are still the design principles that, you know, I value. We've learned more. I've learned more about design. I've learned more about how to write good tests, I think. And I've learned more about how to use tools. The tools we have now are much better than the tools we had back in the day.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not sure if that's a process of me maturing or the just, you know, things have changed as well.
I guess, there's certainly part of this that's true. I'm more of a grumpy old man than you, but I wonder whether that is the advance of practice, or whether that is a matter of experience. I can't tell honestly, personally, for some of those things. But it seems to me that what I see in other people, and I remember myself, was that earlier on I had a focus on wanting to use the language to its max and know all of the wrinkles of the technologies. And if I'm honest, I'm less interested in that part of the problem now. And I guess that's where I was going. Do you recognise yourself in any of those? Not the grumpy old man bit, but apart from that.
I think I met test-driven development very early in my career.
Right.
I mean, I've been only working for a couple of years and I was like, object orientation is fantastic. That was the thing. And then I read Kent Beck's book, Extreme Programming Explained. And the team I was working with at the time, we decided to adopt XP and started writing unit tests. And I was like, oh, unit tests, this is the best thing. So all of that was really introduced to me very early. And I was like, this is so much better than what I was doing before. So for me, it's not been so much of an interest in exploring the boundaries of my language and really nerding out on that. It's been, okay, how do I actually persuade the people around me to also do object-oriented design and write tests and all this stuff that I'm convinced is the right way to do things.
Yeah, and that's I guess that is the direction that your career has taken, certainly in recent years, of trying to effect that kind of communication.
Right. I mean, I think the big picture view of my career, it's been entirely having discovered good ways to build software pretty early on. It's how do I spread that?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I've done with the Coding Dojo. Is my kind of big thing I was doing about 10, 15 years ago. The book came out 2011. And then, that was good. It had some flaws. And then technical coaching is what I've been doing about the last 5 years as a way to spread this kind of ways of working amongst developers, really.
And so how do you think we do that effectively? Because that's a hard problem.
It really is. It really is. I mean, when I first, read Kent Beck's book, I was like, well, everyone should read this book. And then they should go and just write some tests like we did. But actually, it's not that easy. There's a lot of skill that you need. And most people can't learn a skill like TDD from reading a book. I didn't. I mean, I learned it together with others. Mm-hmm. And they were very good programmers. And I kind of was learning it in a social context where it was encouraged. So I think there's a part of it which is learning skills, but there's also a part of it which is the culture and context that you're working in. So now the focus of my technical coaching is how do we get people to gain skills. There are difficult skills that you need to learn that most software developers never learned in college or wherever. But there's also this social context that you need to set up, a kind of team culture. So the coaching is also trying to address that part. Because, I mean, my previous attempts really were the Coding Dojo, which was a lot about skill. Mm-hmm. And there was a certain aspect of it, which was creating a space, a social context, a group of people to learn together with. But now that's much more explicit in what I'm doing. I'm working with teams who work to build software together normally. So I go into a team that know one another and trying to help them to create that context of learning and where they encourage one another.
And that seems to me a deeply important idea and a problem in our industry. I think if I remember rightly, Bob Martin wrote the foreword to one of your books.
Yes, he wrote the foreword to Coding Dojo handbook. Yeah.
One of the things that always intrigued me from Bob Martin was the idea that the average tenure of a software developer in our industry is under 5 years, which means that one of the huge problems that we face, that's probably unusual in many industries, is that we don't have, most developers coming into the industry don't have the exposure to more experienced people that you were talking about that help them through their apprenticeship, really, of learning. And so people like you and I that are trying to find different ways of helping people to learn stuff have to, in some ways, try to find ways to cover that gap. Because the best way of learning, I saw a great video of yours in which you were using some tool to count the votes of an audience through an app on, how they learn TDD. And the commonest way was the way that you described. That the best way to learn test-driven development is to pair with somebody that already knows how to do it.
Yeah, I think so. There just aren't enough of those people to pair with.
Yeah, and so one, you want to take advantage of that, and two, you want to facilitate that, and then when you can't do that, you fall back on people like us who try and find ways of helping people over that hump without necessarily being able to pair with everybody over long periods of time to teach them.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I know that approach works for teaching TDD, and I've seen it work. But it's quite kind of frustrating if you're thinking, well, I'd like to learn this skill, but I don't know anyone I could pair with.
Yes.
But things have kind of changed a bit now since the pandemic.
Yes.
One really big thing that's happened is ensemble working or more programming. And that idea maybe has been around a while, but I think what we discovered during the pandemic was that remote working is an option, and that remote ensemble really does work very well, actually.
Yeah.
And so it's like pair programming only with more people. So and there's come up now that there's even open ensembles that random people can just sign up and join, working on open source software, usually. So that if you haven't got anyone in your team who you can learn TDD from, maybe you could join an open ensemble and meet people who are practicing TDD that way and work with them. So I think that there's new possibilities, like that's an example. And then, of course, the technical coaching that I do is trying to build on the same ideas that working with someone who knows TDD is the way to learn it. And I do it ensemble. I mean, when I'm working with clients, we get the whole team all working together on the in their code, in their production code, trying to apply these techniques.
And that seems like a key step, that last step of working in people's production code. So could you explain a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, so it's the most wonderful and challenging part of being a technical coach. I mean, when I'm coming in to coach a team, I have to get to know them a bit, and you never know what the code's going to look like when they show it to you, and you don't know what specific challenges they're going to have for adopting effective technical practices. So it's always that excitement of what am I going to discover, and then you have to work out quite quickly what's the most important technical practices they need. Is that test-driven development, or actually what I'm discovering mostly is they need more effective refactoring skills, because they've got a lot of code that is not very well designed and doesn't have very many tests often. So that's the challenge I'm facing quite often. So then we set up a series of coaching sessions where I sit with them, and we have ensemble coding in their code, and we try and do some refactoring, and or we try and write some tests, and I mentor and coach them through it. I never put my hands on the keyboard changing their code. So all of the code is written by the team, all of the tests, but I'm there to support and mentor. And then the measure of my success is when I've gone, can they still do it?
Yes.
Will they carry on? So that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment with the technical coaching. And of course, part of it is teaching as well, because often their production code is so difficult that we need to actually do some practice on something a bit easier. So we do some code kata exercises as well.
That sounds very similar to the way that I teach TDD as well in some ways. But I have an amusing, I don't know, a depressing war story that reinforces your point. I was running a series of TDD classes for a fairly large team, and at the end of each, I'd go and spend a day with one of the teams and kind of pair with each of the team members for a little while, and just in their code bases. We've done some other stuff in their code base as well. And I was sat next to this chap one day, and I said, "Oh, there's a chance we could create a new class there. We could isolate that bit of code and reuse it." And his kind of whole body language, he kind of slumped and he bowed his head. And I said, "What's wrong? Isn't that a good thing?" He said, "No, we've got to create a form and we've got to apply to create a new class." And you're going, what? So those barriers that you were talking about sometimes are not the obvious ones. I'd not come across that before, having to fill in a form to create a new class. That was a new one on me.
Yeah, goodness, no, I haven't seen that either. Yeah, but no, you're right. A lot of the time it's I mean, I focus on the team and the culture and the skills within the team. But yes, there's often stuff outside the team which is also preventing improvements. Policies that have come from well-intentioning architects and managers who are trying to help, but they're really not, you know.
Yeah, and that's one of my things, I suppose, in the kind of consultancy that I do these days, is it's often about the way that teams organise and the way that people interact, much more than it is about the technology. Occasionally I'll get my rocks off on somebody calls me in to talk about something technical, and I have some extra fun then, but a lot of the time it's talking about these, as you said, socio-technical things, really, which it's the way in which we organise ourselves and the ways in which we communicate, which is what all the data says. It's what you know, the Accelerate book says, and what the Google research and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's important. And I guess I've mostly just tried to get somebody else to worry about that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm going to be successful, I need to have some focus. And so I'm aware that all of those things are important around the team. But yeah. I'm trying to, for myself, just stay focused on software developers in the editor or in their coding environments.
Yeah. How
can I help them there? And leave it to somebody else, some other coach, some other manager, to try and sort out the rest of the stuff that needs to be sorted out, and delivery pipelines and all the other parts of continuous delivery that you promote.
Yeah, indeed. So going back to your kind of your teaching method of, I think this is what I've got from it, and also sort of reading some of your stuff and looking at it online, is so you're going to be doing the kind of the normal sort of, in the example of TDD, teaching TDD with coding katas and showing people some of the principles, then letting them do that stuff, but then using ensemble programming or working with people in their own code bases to kind of realize, to show this stuff in a real context. Is that a reasonable description?
Yeah, I mean, it's interleaved. I like to do it that I do quite short learning sessions with exercises for an hour. So I call it a learning hour. And then we have a short break, and then the next 2 hours we spend ensemble in their code. Yes. And then a couple of days later I come back and we do it again. So I do these half-day sessions with the teams. And
this is what your second book is about, and what you refer to as the Samman Method.
Yes. So the Samman Method is the name that I made up to describe the way I do technical coaching.
All names are made up.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I thought if I give it a name, then maybe it will be easier to find information on the internet. So so that's the essence of the Samman Method, is that you should do both teaching in small sessions and ensemble in teams in their code, and to not be there full time. Basically, so that the team has to have time in between the sessions to learn to apply the techniques.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't really help if. That's what I found with the coding dojo. It was so good fun. People would come and do code katas and be really enthusiastic, and then it just never. And a lot of the time, it never seemed to transfer into their production code. Mm-hmm. There was this gap between the katas that are fun and relatively straightforward, and the production code, which is often, it's just in a different scale. It's completely much more difficult to know how to write tests when you've got that much code and there are no tests. And
So do you think? I think I know the answer to this already. I guess I'm leading you to answer to talk more about the Samman Method. But this is, you use this technique for other things other than just teaching TDD?
Yes, and that's, I think, because of the kind of companies that I've been working with. So I'm based in Gothenburg, Sweden. So I'm not in Silicon Valley. I'm not in London or even Stockholm. There's not a bunch of hip and trendy startups. bringing me in. It's established companies in the automotive, telecoms, life science industry where the focus of their product is something other than software usually. Mm-hmm. And they've got a lot of code that's been there a long time. And so when I come in and I'm like, oh yeah, we should do TDD, and they're like, yeah, okay. I look at their code and I'm like, okay, I think we need to focus on refactoring, unit test design, and how to make incremental change so that your code gets better. Mm-hmm. And that's really been the focus of what I've been doing. And not trying to kind of start over and throw it out.
Yeah.
But, starting from where they are and what's always my focus, what is going to make the situation better for these people? What is going to improve the life of these developers and make change easier in the future? So, yeah, that's where I am, really.
I philosophically, I think that we're well aligned on that, in that I've worked with some very good people who would just, they were able to say, no, that's rubbish, let's get rid of that and we'll rewrite it. And occasionally that always makes me nervous. I'm an incrementalist. I much prefer to just evolve solutions from wherever we are to where I want to be. But that's the way that I think about it. I think of it, I think software development's more like tending a garden than in some respects than it is about having some genius inspiration and springing to some wonderful solution in one giant step. So I, that ability to make, as you said, identify the real problem that people have and where they're at, and then try and help them to move on. So what are the kinds of problems? So I think we both live in that world mostly of, startups are unusual and easier in many respects. So we live in that world of working with organizations and development teams that are, that have a legacy of, for want of a better term, of code and practice and so on. So where do you start? Where do you start addressing that problem?
Yeah, so as I said, I try and keep my focus very much on the developers who I meet and their situation and how I can make small changes that will add up. And I think if I was coming in at a different level as a management consultant, I would have a different answer because I think there's leverage points at all levels in an organization. Mm-hmm. And some of them will have a big effect, actually. And sometimes you can be at this, the management level, and actually nothing you do has any effect because the problem is in the code.
Yeah.
So for me, the problem, I'm working at that level, at the team, at the level of the code, and I'm trying to help the team to see that it could be better, that there are tools that they have that they're not using effectively. Often they've got a fantastic refactoring tool, and they've got a really complex editor that gives them so much information and allows them to do so much analysis, and they've got no idea how to use it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they've got some idea, but there's some quick wins there just to show them what they've already got on their desktop that they can start using more effectively.
And sorry, I interrupted.
And then there's the test strategy. I mean, you've got to get tests in place and feedback. So I guess one route that may take us is that takes us into approval testing, perhaps, as a place to start. Yeah, so approval testing is a great technique when your code is not very well structured, but you would like to get some tests in place so that you can refactor it. And you've got a video about introducing approval testing where you show this process.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to get some tests in that are fast enough that you can start getting some confidence to refactor.
Yes. So could you explain it for people that haven't seen my video? Or
Yes, of course. So you try and take a piece of code that kind of hangs together. It may not be the usual kind of small unit you have in a classic unit test, but something that you can isolate without using too many mocks. So maybe a function that does a few more things than a standard unit test.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's going to produce some form of text, then that's a bonus. Like if it's generating XML or something like that, then it's you basically try and get it to produce an output that if it's not text, you can convert it to text.
Yeah.
So that you write a piece of code that's, I would call a printer in that case. So if you output this piece of code manipulating the state of a small tree of objects, you'd write a printer that would be able to render the state of those objects as text in a readable way. Or if it's already producing XML, you start with that. You start with the XML, and you record that, So the first time when you create the test, you run the code, you look at the output and say, well, yeah, as far as I can tell, that looks correct. I'll approve that. And you store it in an approved file. And then the next time you run the test, it will just compare against that stored text.
Yeah.
And if it matches, the test passes. And if it doesn't match, then if you were refactoring, you may have made a mistake. And at that point, you can go back and refactor it again without making a mistake. So for the and that's what it's a characterization test, characterizing what the thing does.
Yeah.
The thing that approval testing does that's more than characterization testing is it allows you, because you've designed that output in some way so that you can look at it and you've approved it. When you get a failing test where it's not a refactoring mistake, where you've added a feature or you've fixed a bug or whatever, you can then look at the diff between what you approved previously and what you've got now. And you can say, well, I like the new one better. I approve that, and easily overwrite the approved file with the new. So that's where the name is from. It's this, because of this explicit step you need to take to read the output and decide to approve it.
Yes, and just to add to that is one of the places where I've seen that widely used that's slightly different to what you were describing is for graphical things. So Goiko Adzik, for example, has a tool called Appraise that does approval testing for graphics, and you can kind of click between the two. If you like the change, you keep it, and if you don't, you don't. But that idea of validating the output of the system and allowing you to pick which one wins, when a test fails, I think that's a really useful tool to be able to deal with complex systems. And I think I read somewhere that you've used this in some quite complicated software.
Yes, I have. This technique, my husband is a software developer as well, and he invented this tool for doing this back in 2003 and open sourced it, text to test. And he's been using it ever since. And I've worked with him in several different organizations on using this approach. So he's done it with airline crew optimization software. That's where it grew up. And then he did it with this. It was a healthcare application for hospitals managing blood tests and results of blood tests. And it worked really well in that situation. And now he's working in the automotive industry and doing it again in a great big microservices application for managing trucks. Yeah.
So when I first, I think I first heard about the technology, I'd kind of come across the idea of kind of snapshotting the results and comparing them by virtue of doing test-driven development before, I suppose. But the first time I came across, I think you were talking about it at a conference that we were both at, and your husband was there too. And I remember being slightly snippy about it and dismissive because I missed the point because I was thinking about something else. But I think it has an important role. Can you say where you think it's applicable and where it's not? Because I don't know whether you agree with me, but I think there's places where it's not the right tool and places where it's exactly the right tool.
Yes. So I mean, I'm still a fan of TDD and unit testing, and I would still do that for validating the small pieces of my software. Approval testing more comes into its own when this piece of code that you're testing is a little larger, when it has more than one outcome that you want to check. I mean, the classic unit test response to, well, it's got more than one outcome, so write more tests, just more tests. Each one tests one thing. But with an approval test, actually, it checks lots of things because the diff, each line in the diff is like insertion, effectively. So it's better when you've got slightly larger pieces. So as part of a test strategy where you've perhaps got unit tests for the smallest pieces, you might use approval testing for those middle layer tests, where you've got bigger chunks that you want to validate together. And then even bigger than that, end-to-end tests where you've got the whole system are notoriously slow and flaky and expensive and often done manually. But I've seen very real successes with an approval testing approach in that kind of situation, together with a few other practices. Because the challenge there is to make the test reliable, fast, and cheap to maintain. Yeah. And I think the approval testing piece helps with the cheap to maintain aspect. So I've had some success with that, and I would love to go into more detail, but I fear that I might just go off and start ranting.
You're welcome to rant, but I tend to use approval testing principally for to support refactoring in legacy. That's the absolute, wonderful use for me. I also like it in this idea of, particularly for graphical things, because graphical things are always difficult to test. If you've got something graphical, just saying, does it still paint the picture that I want it to paint after I've changed it? It's quite good at those sorts of things. But do you think I'm missing something? Am I missing something in its use? So I'm also a big believer in acceptance tests to drive the development process, and as you say, fine-grained TDD to do the, does the code do what I think the code's doing, sort of feedback, and to drive my design choices.
Yes. So approval testing doesn't help you drive your design at the lowest level. Yeah. It doesn't, and that's one of the reasons it's so good for legacy code, because there isn't any design at the lowest level. It's just the big ball of mud. And so I think you're right. It really is very useful for those situations where there aren't small units and you want to get a larger piece under test so that you can refactor it. That's certainly one of the good points for that. But I would also look at approval testing for acceptance test-driven development, which some people are like, well, you can't, because you can't write the test first, because one of the things with approval testing is that it's always the thing you approve has been generated by your program. Yeah. So you can't have a test that passes until your program is generating some output for you to approve. But the thing is, you can still start designing your test before the system exists, just by making a sketch of what you think the output's going to look like. So the test that you create it's got the arrange and the act designed, but the assert part is going to be replaced by a print diff. And you can't have a print diff until you've got something to print. But you can make a sketch on a piece of paper or a whiteboard or in a document. It's going to look a bit like this, and I'll know it when I see it.
When would you choose to do that rather than more traditional acceptance testing, sort of BDD style scenarios?
Well, because I'm such a fan of the approach, if I got the chance, I would, that's what would be my first go-to. But if people are already being successful with other tools, then I would use them.
Okay, so you think it's better in those scenarios, and that's where you'd start?
That's where I'd start.
Okay. Okay. I would. We could argue about that because I would start in another place. So I'm not going to be as rude to do that. But just one of the things that I think about. One of the things that makes me nervous always about tests that are generated from code is that they're kind of self-referential. So if you are, I was reading something recently about one of the AI tools could just generate tests for you for your code, and all that does is say, yes, the code that I wrote is the code that I wrote, and that's what I want approval tests for, but that's not what I want other tests for. So.
Right, but no, you can still write them beforehand.
Yes.
I mean, when you're designing your tests with a BDD tool like Cucumber or SpecFlow, you've got the give and when then. The approval testing is just saying change the way you do the then part. So you still got to design the give and when. You still got to think of the scenarios. You still got to discuss with the business person how is this supposed to work. And you've still got to translate what they say into something that's executable. It's just that you're not specifying that assert part or that then part in any great detail before the application exists.
So the need is expressed in the test, but the result is implicit. Is that fair?
Yeah, the result is sketched.
Yeah.
It's
sketched in the code though, right? At the start.
No, I mean, that's the thing with these kind of tests. When I'm working with text tests, it sits outside of your application. So you're not writing the tests in a programming language in the same way. You think of step definitions in SpecFlow or BDD. That's the glue that's joining your feature file to your system. So when you're having that initial discussion, it's the feature file that you're discussing. Just like in a approval testing, I'd just be discussing scenarios with what inputs they're going to have, and what action are they going to take, or series of actions, and often you're building further on a product that exists, so they can say, oh, it's going to look like this in the GUI, and then at this point I'm going to have a new button there that I'm going to press, and this is going to happen. So you write the test that clicks there and does the thing, and then says, okay, yeah, there's going to be a new button. So you've got a thing that executes, and then at a point it says can't click the button, just like you do in BDD. And you haven't spent much time specifying what the GUI should look like. Then you've just kind of said it's going to show this result, and then when you actually build the button and it shows the new result, then you say, oh yeah, that's what I wanted, and you might even show it to the business person, and then you get approved.
Yeah, that makes sense. So sorry, that was that sounded dismissive, but that's not what I meant. I was thinking of the next question.
Right, sure.
No, that makes it clearer to me. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. So I understand it better. One of the questions that I often get asked is about, I guess one of the questions that I'm interested in is this is big picture stuff again. So I'm pulling you away from the code focus that we've been talking about, which is absolutely important. But how do we get our industry to move forwards in terms of to better educate people and better bring people in? How did you get started, and what kind of gave you your interest and your passion? You talked a little bit about your early days in computing, and you happened to be in a good team that picked up extreme programming early. But what got you started, I suppose, and drawn into the engineering world?
Well, I mean, my dad was a physicist, and I wanted to be a physicist and an astronomer. So I went to university to study natural sciences and physics. And after a couple of years of that, I was like, actually, I think maybe I want to work in industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I switched to the engineering departments, and I have a degree in electrical and information engineering. And at university, I met my husband, Jeff, and he has been writing computer programs since he was like 13, and always knew that he wanted to be a programmer. And of course, he influenced me, and he talked so warmly about this. And I did a few courses in programming. I think I was taught very badly. And then I managed to come out of university into a kind of economic situation where I could get a job as a software developer very easily. And I got a lot of advice from Jeff, and I worked with some very good people who mentored me. And I think I was very fortunate. I got a very good grounding in software development. So your question was then, well, how do people today get a good grounding in software development? And I listened to your interview with Ino, and I was really pleased to hear that she was doing stuff in universities to improve the way it's taught. Yeah. That seems really positive. But I think most people get hired and thrown into a project team straight from university, and they have to learn on the job a lot of things. And that's where the technical coaching comes in, because I think that should be something that I would love to see it be more widespread, that it would be normal for teams to take in a technical coach, or for the lead developer in the team to have a more explicit focus on coaching and spreading good practice and knowledge. And that there would be some amount of the time budgets allocated for not just team building, but skill building and bringing the newer developers on, mentoring.
That's another of those things that I'm a bit grumpy about. Is it seems to me that often the commercials of software development are just applied in such a naive way that every organisation is looking for cookie cutter plug replacement developers with exactly the skills that they need, with exactly the experience that they've had before. They're not prepared to teach anybody. They're not prepared to grow the people that they have, which seems to me naive and dumb, if I'm honest. The best organisations that I've worked in focused deeply on growing the skills of the people that they had, and because that's the way that you build better organisations. So it seems rather strange to me that people don't do that, but I'd agree with you completely on that. So you now work as an independent consultant. So that's another question that I often get asked. So I guess, what made you make that move, and what do you think it takes to make that kind of move?
So I tried being independent before. About 2010, I got unexpectedly fired from my job, and I thought, well, I'll make a go of this as an independent. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And that was when my Coding Dojo book got written and came out. And I found that I got really lonely, and that selling is really hard work. Yeah. So at that point, I thought, right, let's just go and get a job. So I found a really nice company with really good people and a lovely role where I could do architecture and test design, and it was great. But I found after a while that actually, I was getting a bit too comfortable. I was there for about 3 years, and it was great, but I wanted more challenge and more variety. And that's so I went back to consulting, and I joined a consultancy company because I thought I don't want to get lonely again. So I've worked now for a couple of different consultancy companies, and I've had great colleagues and done lots of great things. But then this time around, I thought, well, actually, I think I could make another go of being independent. And there were some projects I wanted to pursue that didn't really fit in with the consultancy company that I was working for. So I wrote my book while I was there, but then I would like to really take this a step further and see if I can do more than just doing technical coaching consulting myself. Can I find a way to scale this so that it's not just me and the teams I can coach. So I've been trying to build up a community. I've got this Samman Technical Coaching Society, which my previous consultancy company, Pro Agile, helped me to set up. So I feel that I can go independent, and I've still got not colleagues, but business associates in the Samman Society, people who I trust, who I'd be willing to work with, and I can bounce ideas off.
Yeah. I think that kind of support network's important wherever you work.
Right. So I wanted to give it another go, and I would like to start a YouTube channel. In fact, by the time this video comes out, I think it might have started and launched. And this was one of the reasons I wanted to go independent, so that I could do that. And
cool.
So I look at what you've done, Dave. I think it's fantastic. You are such a strong, independent voice on YouTube with a big audience, and you can speak your mind, and you're not beholden to any big company or something like that. And I was very attracted by that idea of being able to talk my own opinions, and talk and try and encourage technical coaches everywhere, and provide some materials and resources for people who would like to do technical coaching, or even just try it a little bit part-time. Is kind of the idea.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. I'm pleased, and I wish you the greatest of luck with the YouTube channel, which we have talked about before. But it's a great thing to do, and I agree with you. I mean, I couldn't go back to working for anybody else again, I don't think, because I enjoy the freedom to be able to express my opinions, and I'm sure that I'm wrong sometimes, but that's okay. That's the nature of opinions and the nature of advice. It's, if I'm giving advice away for freely, it's worth what you paid for it. Right.
Oh, but it's based in so much experience that, no, Dave, you're selling yourself short there.
But I think this kind of closes back to some of the stuff that we were talking earlier, because if you would forgive me putting words in your mouth, but it's certainly what I think. I have had a wonderful career doing something that I've loved, and I'd like to, one of the reasons for me starting my YouTube channel was I just wanted to try and help other people to find better ways of working. What you said right at the beginning of our talk today, you started off fairly early in your career landing on some good ways of working, and then got enthused and wanted to show other people. Me too. I came to some of those things a bit later, maybe, but absolutely, and that gets us into you've used some words that are triggers for me. So you said that you trained as an engineer, and think. No, I'm not going to say that. So where do you stand on the engineering versus craftspersonship, spectrum? What do you think it is that we do?
Okay, so I see myself as an engineer. That's my training, and engineering, as you I think have said, is it's applying science, scientific methods, scientific principles to something very practical, and that has real world results, and is useful. So that's great. Whereas craftsmanship is kind of about the individual creator creating something that is used and is useful, usually, like a violin or a table or something. And there can be elements of artwork in that. And I like to think software is a little bit more hard science than that.
Yeah.
Reusable, repeatable, transferable. And the thing is, I think this whole idea of craftsmanship became really popular amongst software developers because it's this romanticized image of this craftsman who is so proud of what they've built. It's this image of quality, expertise, and pride. That is so attractive to software developers. We have this immense innate motivation to build good software, to do good design that we're proud of. So we would like to have that. And I think that's why this whole craftsmanship became so attractive. But I think it's completely the wrong metaphor for what we actually do, you know.
I agree with you entirely. I think that the craftsmanship movement was timely. I think it was probably a necessary step, but I think it was a step away from something rather than a step towards something, really. Yeah. So it was a step away from kind of trying to use the techniques of manufacturing for software and apply them to software, and almost attempting to eliminate the creativity, which is stupid, because software is an incredibly creative discipline. But I think that's what went before through the. I think we suffered from that through the 80s and 90s, and the craftsmanship movement started to move us away from that, which was good. But often when I get in conversations about engineering, it's really about, and it's more of a debate about manufacturing versus software development than engineering versus software development, because engineering is deep. All of the things that you just said about that people apply to craftsmanship, you could just replace the word craft with engineering, and it still makes complete sense to me. So I would argue, as an engineer, latterly I've come to now once again think of myself as an engineer. I didn't always. I went through a period when I was at ThoughtWorks of disdaining the idea of engineering for a little while, but now I don't. But I would think that probably the height of human creativity is in engineering. If you're building the Mars rover or the International Space Station or the internet, for goodness sake, then these are done by engineers. This is engineering thinking at play, and it's hugely creative and constrained by reality. You can't. So craft. My delightful, gorgeous three-year-old granddaughter does craft, but you wouldn't want to use it or your life to depend on the fruits of her work.
No, that's quite right, and it's in the language as well. I mean, yeah, it's archaic. Craftsman, it's an archaic term. I don't want to be called a craftsman. Yeah. And I don't want to be called a crafter either, because it sounds like I'm fiddling with like what your 3-year-old granddaughter's doing. Yes. That's not what I'm doing. So I don't think it's a very helpful analogy, actually. But I still like to tap into that feeling of pride and quality and pride in what you do. That's valuable, but you can have that in engineering.
I've done this for years. I annoy people around me when I'm working, because when I have that moment where you go, oh, I've got it, when you have that moment of inspiration, when you get a new insight into your solution or whatever, I'm the person that shouts out and goes, yeah, or whatever. I'm taking great pleasure, joy in that moment of creativity, of inspiration, of actually engineering insight that we're talking about. So I'm absolutely with you that we should be taking pride. We should be taking pride in taking ownership of our work. I think 100%. What do you think that you bring to it then, from your background in non-software proper engineering, engineering before you came to software?
Oh, well, I mean, my training was in engineering. This was a long time ago, Dave. It was, but yeah, I think it's always wanting to learn new things and try out new techniques, and there's always a better way to do things. Keep reading, that's some of the things that I still have with me from that time. I think that just that curiosity and there must be a better way to do this kind of feeling.
When I wrote my engineering book, I did a fair amount of research, as you do when you write a book, into the history of software engineering, and I just one of my heroes is Margaret Hamilton, who led the team doing the flight control systems for many of the Apollo missions and the lunar lander in particular. But one of the things that she talks about often in her work then was building what she called man-rated systems. People's lives depended on these things. They had to work, and so her focus and her team's the focus she instilled in the teams that she led was, thinking in, I think of this as part of an engineering mindset of just thinking about all the ways that stuff can go wrong, and just thinking about ways.
There's a new kid on the block in the realm of kids.
Sorry about that. I just pressed my earbud and it started playing something. but thinking in terms of the ways in which things can go wrong, and then how you want to cope with them, how you want to deal with them, how you want to test them, how it's a new case for a test or whatever else.
I remember actually I saw Margaret Hamilton in person speaking at a conference in Luxembourg. I was so excited to actually see her, and I think she told some story about that she had a small child while she was working on this software, and she brought them in and put them in front of the software, and this small child found a bug in the Apollo software, caused a crash, so she filed this bug, and the leadership said, "Oh, well, that would never happen in real life because the astronauts are highly trained; they would never do that." Pressing random buttons. And then she said that of course it did happen. One of the astronauts got a bit flustered and pressed the button combination, and she was like, "You should have listened to me." I guess I feel that I've had almost the same experience. My then 14-year-old went on work experience at a software company where my husband was working. So they stuck her in front of the software and had her just, we did supply her with a document of naughty strings that she could feed into it, with lots of difficult characters and so on. And
that was you and your husband.
Yeah, me and my husband. We were try feeding some of these strings. And she found 6 bugs in their production system. Cool. One of which was serious and critical, and they had to fix straight away. So yeah. Anyway, that was a story about me and Margaret Hamilton,
Just like that.
Yeah.
What fantastic stories. I'm a space addict anyway, but the software engineering thing as well. There's just so many wonderful quotes from her and her team as well about what they were doing. But one of my other favourite quotes was that they were getting on kind of inventing this really iterative, fast-paced engineering approach to the development of the flight control systems. Meanwhile, NASA was busy kind of trying to build this bureaucratic edifice around it all, getting in the way, and all the work was being done underneath with them riffing really fast and trying stuff out, putting stuff in that nobody else had thought of, coming up with their, so it's Margaret Hamilton's team that saved the Apollo 11 landing by putting in the fail fast mechanism to switch off the computer and reboot it with just critical jobs when the computer became overloaded. The 1202 and 1201 errors, as it was. Sorry, I'm nerding out now.
Yeah.
It's just I love all of that stuff.
Stories.
One of the other things one of the phrases that you used when we were talking together today was about architecting for testability. Could you just riff on that a little bit, because I think that's deeply important and one of the huge values of the kinds of development that you and I talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's about feedback. You need feedback, and the sooner you can get the feedback, as a developer, for better because it's cheaper to, react.
Yeah.
And so you need the cheap, fast feedback. Now, unit tests are fantastic for that because they're always fast and they always give you good feedback. But the thing is, that's not the only kind of feedback you need. You need bigger scale tests as well.
Yeah.
And often the feedback cycle on those is too long to be really useful. So it's important that you have an architecture that will allow you to write effective tests for larger pieces.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm kind of mean, architectural testability. It's got to be one of the architectural concerns has got to be how quickly can I get feedback?
Yeah.
How I've got to have tests for larger pieces than my small units that still run quickly enough and effectively enough for the developer to use them in the development process. So there's a bunch of things that I mean, it's not just approval testing there. So I worked on a microservices system, and then you've naturally got a microservice that you can pull out and test, which is a larger piece of code, and you can check that piece is working. And then, of course, you need to also check that it can talk to the other microservices in the right. So at some point, you need some way of checking that it can, even if you're not running all of the other services on your development box, you should be able to test that my service that I'm working on is still talking to the other ones in the right way.
Yes.
And that's about building an architecture with it that will allow you to deploy it in such a way that the developer can see that.
Yes. I would agree. I would agree completely. And I think this kind of links up to what we were talking about earlier about engineering. I increasingly think of this as a full-blown first-class engineering practice of if you start using, designing for testability, it helps you to build better systems, not just in terms of how much you can test them. You end up with better encapsulated systems, nicer interfaces, as you were describing between your microservices, better contracts between them, better isolation, better modularity. All of this stuff you get not as just a side effect. You still need that creativity, intelligence, and smartness in developers and development teams, but certainly amplifies our ability to see that and to do that, it seems to me, which is the best that you can hope for. It's a tool that we can use to achieve those sorts of things. Yeah.
I think I'm with you on all of that. So I worked as an architect in the architecture team, designing test frameworks and trying to help the developers in the teams who were building features to make effective use of this way of that they had this tool available to them. They didn't just have unit tests. I was trying to provide them a context, a framework, an approach that would let them also test their whole microservice and the whole system of microservices while they continue to develop their piece. Yeah. So I've been there, and that was a really valuable experience.
Cool.
It's not kind of what I'm doing at the moment, though. I mean, at the moment, I'm really much more at the nitty-gritty level.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that people that aren't used to working in the way that we are and that we talk about miss very often, is that it's not only about the fine-grained stuff. It's this broader philosophy of development of designing for testability, which helps us to get these bigger systems, and the stuff that you're talking, using the approval tests in the way that you described, using the acceptance tests and BDD tests to kind of structure the way that we work as well as anything else. I've started thinking lately about one of the impacts of test-driven development is that we're designing in the measurement points as well. So it's rather like building a physical device where you want the device to be encapsulated and at some level a black box, but you also want to expose the points at which you can measure whatever it is that's doing, so you can understand whether it's working properly or whatever. And so, I've started to think about it in those sorts of terms, is that by driving our changes from test, we are designing those measurement points in our system, and that gives us deeper insight without without coupling our tests to the internals, which is often one of the failure modes that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people that get a bit shirty about, well, you're just adding that for tests.
Yeah.
You know, we can't have that in a production system. It's a security hole failure waiting to happen. I'm like, yeah, but you've got to operate this system. You've got to have some insight into what it's doing while it's operating. And the, you know, testability is going to give you that. So there definitely has to be a discussion and a balance between the various architectural concerns, but testability's got to be up there.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank you again for agreeing to talk to me today, and wish you every luck with your YouTube channel, which should be out about the time that this comes out, which is great. We're all looking forward to that. I want to thank all of the everybody that's been watching today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the content, hit subscribe and hit like, and go over to Emily's YouTube channel now and watch all her stuff. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Dave. It's been great talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.